All right, let me go ahead and introduce our speaker today. We have Anthony Spicky, or Tony, as he goes by. Tony has been active in the geospatial community for 30 years, so quite a long time. He began his career in 1992 with the Missouri Department of Conservation, where he's just recently retired from, and he's currently the executive director of the GIS Certification Institute. GIS Certification Institute promotes the advancement of proficient GIS professionals through its international GISP certification program. Tony's an active member of the Missouri GIS Advisory Committee, National States Geographic Information Council, Missouri Geographic Names Board, and a past member of the National Geospatial Advisory Committee. In addition to that, Tony's also involved with the FEMA Urban Search and Rescue Team, and he is also a official for football, it looks like. So great to have you, Tony, and the floor is yours.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invite and the opportunity to speak to all of you. I'm actually speaking to you from Columbia, Missouri, but in a few hours, I will be heading to Dallas on my way to Albuquerque to speak at the Tribal Council. So I will actually be in Texas today. And I hope the weather holds out, because I keep getting notes from my airline that you guys are getting some severe weather potentially. So hopefully that won't be the case for you guys and for me. So this afternoon, I'd like to talk a little bit about the benefits of certification within the geospatial profession, but actually overall, and talk a little bit about becoming a GISP. And thank you for the introduction. I have been involved in geospatial for about 30 years. But I do some things on the side. I really like to ski. I am a professional pyrotechnician. I'll actually talk about that here in a little bit. And I'm pretty happy to say I work for the World Championship Kansas City Chiefs. I also work for Mizzou, but no championships there. And of course, Green Bay's having a very good day today. We finally got rid of Aaron Rodgers and look forward to more football and less drama in the upcoming football season. So before we get started, if you guys do have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I will definitely take questions at the end. You can throw them in the chat window, and I think some folks are going to keep an eye out for me. But I will definitely leave some time at the end for questions. And so just kind of getting started, talk a little bit about the GIS Certification Institute. We are a not-for-profit organization that provides the geospatial community with an internationally recognized complete certification program, and that's the GISP certification. We are based in the United States, but we are actually present worldwide. We have GISPs in over 59 countries, and we've granted the GISP designation to about 10,800 folks, and that number continues to grow. The idea behind the GISP and certification within our industry actually started back in the 1990s. And really, it was a lot of folks that helped get this going, but primarily ERISA folks started the idea, and then they did a membership. They did a survey of the membership. And what they found within the ERISA membership at the time, there was an overwhelming desire to bring professional certification to the geospatial industry. And at that point, there really wasn't one that kind of defined what a geospatial professional was. There were a couple for remote sensing folks through ASPRS, but there really wasn't anything associated with what we were doing. And that kind of began that dialogue that eventually led to the GIS Certification Institute. And so we officially became an organization in 2013. So this is 20 years of GISCI. And we're currently supported by 4 geospatial organizations that serve on our board of directors and provide governance. And so hopefully you guys are all familiar with one, ERISA, which I am a member of. I've actually been a member of ERISA for a number of years. NSGIC, which is the National States Geographic Information Council, the American Association of Geographers, and UCGIS, University Consortium for Geographic Information Science. So those are the 4 organizations on our board. And then this spring, we added a 9th board member, and that was a GISP elected GISP to serve on the board. So Shannon Doyle became our newest board member, and she represents the GIS community as a whole, but not through one of these organizations. We're always looking for partners. We're always looking to grow, but that's currently the diversity of our board. So I want to talk a little bit about the importance of professional certification, but I wanted to start by talking about the GIS process and what it takes to become a GISP. So our GISP follows a lot of professional certifications. It is a portfolio and exam-based certification. So if you want to become a GISP, there's a couple things that you have to do. One is that all GISPs, whether they're initial or recertified GISPs, must agree to abide by a set of ethics. And these ethics are based on the idea of do no harm within our profession. If you look at the Code of Ethics, which we post on our website, you'll see it's very similar to a lot of other professional code of ethics, but it does delve into the geospatial field a little bit more. And certainly we have the potential for a lot of issues with geospatial, especially when you start talking about positional location, where folks are, and then you start adding things like health data to the mix, and HIPAA laws and the like, and there's a lot more to it than that. But ethics are very important to any profession, and they're certainly important to ours. And so that's step one in the process, is to agree to be ethical in the profession. The next steps can go in any order. It's to take the test and pass it, and then submit the portfolio. And so what the portfolio is, it's not an exhaustive resume, but rather it is an attestation that you meet certain requirements in education, experience, and contributions back to the profession. And so it's an online process. Once you meet those points, you're good to go. You don't have to put everything in the portfolio, just the minimums to reach those 3 category totals. And then the final piece of that is it requires a 4-year experience level of geospatial employment. And that employment can come in a lot of different varieties. It could be full-time work, part-time work, internships, and the like. Within the portfolio, there's a very, very wide range of what's accepted, because we have a very, very wide range of what we do in our profession. And so we're not necessarily drilling in on anything specific, but rather just a general broad set of education experience and contributions within your aspect of the geospatial field. And that second piece is to take and pass the geospatial knowledge exam. And that is an exam that's offered twice a year. And it's designed to be a rigorous but fair examination of your geospatial knowledge. When you get all 3 of those things put together, and you submit your certification, you become a GISP for a 3-year period. During that time, you are expected to abide by those ethics and do good things. Should you choose to recertify, and most folks do, the process is a little bit different. You do not need to retest. Once you take the test, you're good to go. And you just have to submit a portfolio. That portfolio is significantly reduced, because unlike the initial portfolio, where it's literally everything you've done from the day you were born until you hit the submit button, the recertification portfolio is the last 3 years of your previous certification. And so point totals go down to 24 versus the 150 for the initial, and it's a much easier and simpler process. And then, of course, you got to agree to the ethics statement as well. GISP certification costs, one-time application fee of $100, a one-time portfolio review fee of $100, a one-time exam fee of $250 or $300 if international, if you pass the exam. If you do not and need to retest, you're only charged the exam fee, not the other fees. And then annual maintenance fee of $95 per year for all GISPs. And we waive that the first year for all new GISPs, just simply because of the initial fees to get in the door. But once you become a GISP, $95 per year. Again, it's a 3-year certification period. And then if you choose to recertify, it's also $95 a year. But we allow you to pay a single payment of about $285 just to make everything simpler, which most of the folks do. It's just a lot easier to make that one check and then not have to deal with the second and third payments down the line. Again, recertification is that 3-year process, just like the initial. And so all of our folks are on those 3-year cycles. So we do require an exam for becoming a GISP, again, very consistent with other professional certifications. What the exam does is it provides a measurable competency level. So the exam itself wasn't administered in 2015 until 2015. So prior to 2015, we had a number of GISPs that certified strictly by portfolio. Now, the portfolio requirements were much more stringent and much significantly higher scrutinized. So it was a much more difficult process. However, you had very, very wide variability among the different qualifications of those folks. And so by adding the test, it provided that competency level, but it also provided a much fairer way of evaluating candidates. The test and the blueprint help provide a footprint for students and early career professionals so they know what they can work towards should they choose to take the test. And then it also sets us up for a more specialized certification, because the certification itself is designed to represent the entire geospatial community, not one segment of it. And indeed, we are looking at additional specialized certifications going forward. The exam itself is written by GISPs for GISPs. It is written at a 4-year experience level. So there are questions that come out of professional practice, but you don't need to have experience to take the exam. We do have folks that will take the exam straight out of college, and some will succeed and pass and some won't. I don't know if that's necessarily indicative of where they are in their career as much as how well they studied. But you can take it at any point in your career. You just can't get the GISP without that 4 years of experience. The exam itself is centered on applied knowledge. And that applied knowledge is basically the geospatial body of knowledge that's been put together by the UCGIS and others. And that body of knowledge roughly has about 408 areas where geospatial technology is present in basically in the workforce and in careers. And so we test against 10 content areas or 45 KSA. So about 10% of those different areas, that's where we test against. And so it's really kind of in the center of the profession. You're not going to see a lot of questions on the more, the less ubiquitous aspects of geospatial, such as remote sensing or drone technology. What you're going to see is a focus on fundamentals, cartography, visualization, data management, data analysis, and the like. And so we do offer the exam twice a year. We have an upcoming exam in June. We'll have another one, an exam. Again, can be taken at any point in your career. And then we have a 6-year process in which everyone needs to complete their application. We'll waive that if you say I'm still working on it. But we have over 32,000 applicants in our system. So at some point, we kind of just need to pass along the ones that are inactive and move them out of the pipeline to keep things clean. Again, the exam itself, the knowledge areas came from within the geospatial community. They're built upon that body of knowledge. Again, 400 plus, but really what we're testing against is those 10% that are right in the middle. And so we actually provide all of our candidates with an exam blueprint. And so what the exam blueprint is designed to do is it's designed to basically give you a guide of what types of questions you'll expect to see. It's just not giving you the questions themselves. And so we're kind of giving you the map or the blueprint in which to study and prepare yourself for the exam. And so right now with the current exam blueprint that we have, and we do update it on a regular basis, you could see those 10 knowledge categories, starting with conceptualization and going down to professional practice. I would argue that the first 7 are all conceptual and academic type of knowledge areas that anyone that went through a rigorous geospatial program in school will probably have seen at least elements of those first 7. And so that's more academic or more book knowledge. Whereas the last 3 categories, the application development, system design and management, and professional practice, are more contemporary. So this is where that 4 years of professional experience kind of kicks in. Now, again, that doesn't mean you have to have that experience to take the exam. It's just very, very helpful. And so within those 10 areas, we actually have a breakdown into KSAs. And so I'm not going to show all those to you. I'm just going to show you a couple. Again, all this is available to you on the website, but you can kind of see that breakdown. So if you want to know where the questions are coming from, In terms of conceptual foundations, we're going to ask you questions about datums, coordinate systems, projections, discrete versus continuous phenomenon, earth geometry, et cetera, et cetera. So that first one's kind of like GIS 101, right? Or an introductory GIS class. Whereas category 3, cartography and visualization, that's going to be cartography class or graphics class and the like. And again, these are just kind of those basic conceptual areas that most GIS folks should know. What I've noticed and what others have noticed, when you look at a lot of folks in our field, there are a lot of folks that are very good with software, and they had software training. So maybe they started out in a different field like biology or archaeology. They got an interest in geospatial, and they moved their career in that direction. And so while those folks have a really good fundamental understanding of software and maybe some of the tools, they don't necessarily have the foundational knowledge that most folks would get in a traditional program, whether it's geography, geology, or even affiliated like a certificate program. And that's kind of one of the big differentiators between a GISP and a non-GISP is if those folks haven't gone back and taught themselves some of these things, that's where their knowledge deficit is, and that's why they're not necessarily a complete geospatial professional. And so why is this important? Well, if you know how to do the most advanced analysis and can really tease out the data and get really, really good results. If you have no understanding of how to actually display that information, whether it's an online application or paper map, you've kind of wasted the process, right? You have the ability to do great work and then mischaracterize that data simply because you don't understand cartography and visualization. Or maybe you're working on very discrete data, such as parcels or street center lines or addresses. And you've done a lot of great work, and here's this database that you're going to give to the fire department. But the first time they show up at an address, there's no house there. And that's simply because you didn't realize what your coordinate system was or what your datum was. Again, it's an issue. And so one of the ideas behind a geospatial professional is that they have a fundamental understanding of these various issues. And maybe they don't know or have all the answers on coordinate systems or datums, but they understand what the potential issue could be in data representation. And so they're aware of that, and they know to go back and ensure that they have those right things. And if not, they can educate themselves to make sure they got the data right. So the exam itself is taken at official testing centers worldwide. There's about 800 of them, 100 scored questions, either multiple choice or multiple response. No essay questions. And then there's anywhere from 50 to as many as 80, never 90, non-scored exam questions. And that's just part of the exam writing process where we're writing questions and we evaluate them. So when you take the exam, you don't know which is which. This is a standard practice, so we're not doing anything that other professional testers don't do, but it's designed to make sure that when we ask you a question, it's been tested by your peers. And it's neither too easy nor too hard, but rather right in the middle, and is a fair question for all. Once the exam is completed, at the end of the testing period, we take all of the results, we run them by what's called a psychometrician, and we assure that all of the grading and all the test administration was done properly. I remember in college when I got a bad score on one of those fill in the dot exams, my professor was adamant that the computer didn't make mistakes. The computer never makes a mistake. And then many years later, when I was supervising social scientists that used the exact same technology, I asked them, I said, do those machines ever screw up? And they kind of chuckled and said, yeah, all the time. So I'm pretty sure I didn't get like a 35 on that biology exam. It's probably more like an 80. But my point is, machines make mistakes, people make mistakes. So we grade these tests 3 separate times to ensure that you get the exact result and the appropriate result. And so it usually takes about 3 weeks to get your results. So we do have an official practice exam, which is very helpful. It consists of 50 questions from previous exams, and it's done online. It's $30 and you get to take it twice. And so what this does is it mimics taking the actual test, but you do it in your office or home, wherever you choose to do it. You don't have to go to a testing center, and you do get your results immediately. What this official practice exam does is it scores against the blueprint. So you will actually see a performance report against the 10 exam content areas, and the results are displayed that way. So it gives you at least a partial sense of how well you did in each category and a potential guideline for you to help direct your studying. And so because you could take it twice, what we encourage folks to do is take the first time, get your results, and then target your studying where you didn't do so well. And then when you're ready, take it a second time. We found that this exam is pretty consistent with how folks do in the real exam. So if you take it once and get maybe a 55, take it a second time and get a 70-ish, we would tell you that, yeah, you're probably ready for the exam itself. If you rattle off a 50 and maybe a 60, we'd encourage you to study significantly more if you're going to take that exam, the next one, or, study it and take it at the exam at a next testing period, simply because we don't want you taking the exam and failing. One of the rumors is we want you to fail because we make a lot more money when you retest. But the reality is we lose money on these exams. And so we want you to pass, and for obvious reasons, because we want you to become a GISP, but we don't want you wasting the money. So this is a really, really good barometer for you, just to test how ready you are to actually take the exam. And we do have a second practice exam. This one's free. It's just a PDF though. And it's the original practice exam. The first one we did, we retired it out. So you can go to our website, just download it and take it, and then you score yourself. And you could theoretically take it as many times as you want. The next testing window is June 3rd through the 10th. Deadline to apply is 2 weeks before the test session starts. We can accommodate you all the way up to the day of. That's assuming there's a spot. So we tell folks to get in the loop 2 weeks before, just to make sure they can get a spot in the testing center. It's not often that it happens, but some will fill up. And some are a little bit more limited. They may not have, a full set of dates on a particular day. And so we encourage you to get in there early. And basically, once you sign up and pay, we send you the instructions so you can schedule an exam. And at that point, you schedule directly with the test provider. That way they can contact you directly if there's an issue with their testing center. So now I want to focus really on the benefits of professional certification and why we think it's important. So the question, of course, is why certify? Professional certification is really a process by which a person shows that he or she has acquired the knowledge, skills, experience to perform a specific profession. So it is a set of criteria that the individual meets to get that certification. And why do we have professional certification within our geospatial industry? Well, to be quite frank, it's not something unique. There's over 1,700, there's over 1,600 certifications out there in different fields, but really certification is part of the maturation of an industry. And so, geospatial is really an idea, maybe going back to the late 1800s, 1900s in London. But really in the 1960s, we started to see the first computer programs that led into what became GIS. And so we had an idea that was implemented. And pretty soon we had this thing called technology. So when I got involved in 1989, we had a lot of different software programs. Esri's ArcInfo was one, but we also had things like GRASS, which was a free government one, or ERDOS Imagine for raster-based software. And so really a lot of different technology out there, right? The technology was the programs, the computers. You had to have a really fancy, shiny computer that took up an entire room in order to do GIS back then. It cost a lot of money, and really had like half the computing power of a modern cell phone. But that's what it was. We had this technology. It was called GIS. And when I would go home and see my parents at Christmas and try to explain to them what I was doing, they had no idea unless I said, well, I make really cool maps. And then they knew, right? Because there weren't a lot of folks doing it. Well, eventually, folks realized the power of GIS, and it became an industry, right? So now we had GIS software, but we were starting to get GPS data collectors. We were starting to get additional sensors. We started having a lot more folks involved in creating data. When I got started, you created your own data. The feds had some stuff, but that was it. You didn't pay people to do it. You did it. Now we had folks that were offering services, and it started to grow. And we started to have this thing called the geospatial industry, right? And so that's kind of where GISCI came in. In the 1990s, we now have this industry, but you kind of had an identity crisis for folks. It's like, what are you? You know, you have engineers, you have scientists, you have doctors. If you're doing GIS, what are you? I mean, GIS specialist, GIS analyst. And folks realized that they were no longer in a niche industry, but rather they were in a profession. They were geospatial professionals. And that's where that certification came in. And that's part of the maturation of our industry, is that certification. That's kind of where we are. And our industry is going to continue to grow and expand. And now it's one of the biggest out there. And so the way you define a profession is you have a self-awareness, which we all do, a unique body of knowledge. That's what we base our test on. A social ideal to unify the professionals. We have a lot of those, really, but really at the highest end, most of the folks that I know that do GIS, or at least did it initially, were doing it because it was a way to help people or things, right? A lot of GIS got started in the natural resources field. It was a tool to help our communities and help our natural resources. Now we use it in the medical field, we use it in public safety, but really we're trying to do good things. That's kind of that social ideal, is to do better with GIS. And you could do things a lot better with a GIS than you can with a pen and pencil. Formal organization of its members, URISA, Texas. We have a lot of those organizations. A Hall of Fame, which URISA has, so we do have a Geospatial Hall of Fame, and the Code of Ethics that we've talked about. So we have all those things in the geospatial world, and so now we could say we're a geospatial professional. Common elements awarded by a professional organization, so in this case, the GISCI. It's a confirmation that you possess those skills and knowledge. Again, it's that test and that portfolio. Most certifications are earned after completing education and or experience gained. Again, because there's so many ways to do this, we don't have a course you take in order to get the certification. We say you need to come from a range of education, and that's how you come in. And again, it's the same thing with the experience. There's a lot of ways you can get experience. We're not specific. We're just saying you got to get experience in the geospatial field. Most certifications involve standards and an exam. There are some without, but most have the exam. And then again, just like our GISP, which is valid for 3 years, a credential is usually valid for a limited time and must be renewed. And that's simply because just because you meet the requirements doesn't mean the requirements don't change. And if you've been in the GIS world for more than a couple months, you know that it's constantly changing and constantly evolving. And that's why a GISP must invest in themselves to keep moving forward. So why certify? Well, for one, it demonstrates a commitment to behaviors that enrich the profession. You can't simply take a test, pass it, and then do nothing else to maintain your GISPs. You have to do two things. One is you have to invest in yourself, and the other is you have to invest back in the community. And so what does an investment look like in our community? It's this seminar right here. Going out on a limb, but I think it's fairly safe to say that the folks that help put together this event, they're volunteering their time, right? They're members of URISA. And so URISA has been one of the great geospatial organizations that's done a lot to move our profession forward. If nothing else, they helped create, and they basically did create the GISP. But if you've ever been on their website or seen any of the emails, constantly doing continuing education training, seminars, workshops, conferences, and the like, that helps move our profession forward. And so that's an example of a contribution back to the profession. GISPs have to continue to grow their professional knowledge and skills. I probably stopped using software on a day-to-day basis about 15 or so years into my job because I became a manager. I was managing geospatial programs and a bunch of other stuff. Now I'm an executive director. So why do I need to keep up on GIS? Well, I'm on Missouri Task Force 1, and we were one of the task forces that started using GIS in urban search and rescue. And now we're one of the ones that help keep moving it forward. So when I deploy, I have to know how to use ArcGIS Collector, ArcGIS 123, and I think we still use story maps. I can't remember. We're always changing. So it's critical even for me to keep up my technical skills, because if I don't and we deploy, I'm gonna spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to work these tools rather than use them. And so I too have to keep up, even though my role doesn't allow me to use the software a lot, I still use it. Certification does differentiate yourself from other professionals. It takes a lot to become a GISP, and it takes a lot to maintain it, and that differentiates yourself. And we know in the private sector, there was a preference for GISPs. And we also see a lot of local governments and state governments now either requiring the GISP or preferring it in employment opportunities. And, quite frankly, when I used to hire folks at the state, I'd get, 60, 80 folks that would apply for a job. If I saw that GISP as part of their title, I could thin my list just based on that alone, because I knew that they had at least the skills or the potential for the skills to do the job at hand. And I knew that they were a well-rounded, well-disciplined individual. Didn't mean they were the ideal candidate, but it helped me to thin those lists. And now my agency actually has that as a preferred hiring characteristic. It helps establish your professional credibility because it is a professional credential. And then finally, and perhaps most important for some of you at least, is it does help increase your earning potential. ERISA did a salary survey, I believe it was 2017, and we found that 62% of all GISPs earn more than their peers. We're in the process of doing that survey again, so hopefully we'll have some updated numbers. But we know firsthand in talking with folks out, like in California, most geospatial professionals are in union shops, at least in government. And for some, it's an automatic raise. For others, it's a raise at the next employment contract time. And so we do know that it can lead to increased earnings for folks, and that's pretty important, especially in today's day and age. So one of the questions we often get is, what's the difference between certification and licensure? And I'll throw a third thing in there, and that's a certificate. A certificate program is typically a vocational, or more often than not in our field, educational program with an associated set of coursework. There are a ton of universities that will offer you it used to be a certificate in GIS. Now there's like Penn State has like 20 or 30 different geospatial certificates. But at the end of the day, it's basically, it's educational coursework, not an academic degree, and not a certification, but it is a piece of paper that says you have met the following academic requirements. And generally it's just, it's kind of almost like a minor, or it's like a focus in a certain area, in this case, geospatial. So certificates are good, don't get me wrong, but there's nothing professional about that certificate. It's really related to academics. Actual professional certification is that official document that proves that you have obtained a certain level of knowledge or achievement. So in this case, the portfolio and the exam, that qualifies you for a line of work. Again, doesn't mean you know everything, but it means you met that expectation of knowledge. Licensure is proof that you are licensed to work in your profession. The biggest difference between licensure and certification is licensure is an actual legal designation with a very clear set of requirements for each vocation. Right? And so, at least in our industry, I think the best example is land surveying. Land surveyors must be licensed to do their work, or at least in most states, if not all. And that is a legal designation. And so if a land surveyor does something wrong, they're legally responsible because they have a very, very clear set of requirements as to what you're doing. And so, typically land surveyors are going to have licensure, are going to have insurance, high level of insurance for the work that they do, because sometimes you'll hear about this, or maybe you've seen it in your community where a surveyor surveyed something wrong and a house was built in the wrong spot over a property line or in an easement or something else. And so that person's legally liable. One of the biggest issues with licensure is it's unique to each state. So in the case of surveying, I've talked to some of my survey friends and they're like, oh, my state is completely different than another state because a lot of it boils back to the types of projection systems that they use and the like. So it's not easy to take that to a different state. I actually have two certifications. One is the GISP and one is a custom meeting planner. And then I have 3 licenses. I'm a licensed EMT, I'm a licensed display pyrotechnician, and a licensed proximity pyrotechnician. Each of those licensures is valid only in the state of Missouri. I am not allowed to do any of those things in another state unless they have reciprocity, which I don't know of any that do. or if they have no laws. I was told when I did a seminar in Florida that you don't have to be licensed to be a professional pyrotechnician, which is strange, but it can happen. And so whereas I can take the GISP everywhere I go, I can't take those other 3 licenses with me, and I completely understand why. So again, there's over 1,600 types of certifications out there, everything from cosmetology to geospatial to meeting planning. And about 20%, not quite 20% of the workforce has some type of certification or license. And that's the most up-to-date number. The labor statistics doesn't update it often, but I'll be curious to see what the next update looks like. Within our profession, there are 4 different certifications available, or there were 4 certifications available. One is the Esri technical certifications. Those are unique to ArcGIS products. So certainly valuable, and they certainly are a good thing to get if that's appropriate to what you do, but they're specific to the software itself, not the industry. And that's how they're marketed as technical certifications for software. The U.S. Geospatial Intelligence Foundation used to have a GeoInt certification. They have suspended it, and to the best of my knowledge, they have not resurrected it, and I'm not sure they will. They might, but I'm not heard anything to indicate they would. ASPRS, which was probably the first, they're up to 10 certifications, but they're 5 certifications spread in 2 levels. And so these primarily focus on remote sensing and LiDAR, but they do have a more generalized GIS type certification, but those numbers are fairly low. The only other certification is the GISP, which, like I said, is a worldwide one, and we've got over 10,800 folks that have received the certification. So far in excess of the other 2 organizations. Within our industry, we find that about 50% of 50% of our GISPs come to us from the private sector. And I think primarily that's simply because most of those companies want to be able to use that as a form of leverage when they're bidding on contracts. They can say that our staff, like remote sensing projects, when I've worked for the state of Missouri, we had a requirement that at least one person on that project be an ASPRS licensed photogrammetrist. I think that requirement may still be there. Same thing with GISP. We are seeing RFPs go out that say, hey, you do have to have a GISP on your staff that works on this project. So there's a big advantage, and some of our, there are private sector folks, that have, 20, 50, I think as many as 75 people working for a single company. Next is government, about 35% of folks. Most are local government followed by state, but we do have a few federal folks. And then the remaining 15% are academia, tribal, not-for-profit. I'm technically now a not-for-profit category, and then a small number of students, but we do actually have students with the GISP. So why is certification important to you? How do you define a geospatial professional? How do you qualify the capabilities of a new hire? There's really not any guide or piece of paper, I think, that's universally recognized that says, yeah, this person is a geospatial professional. It takes a couple things, and really certification, I think, is a key role in that. And the other thing to remember is that experience doesn't necessarily equal foundational knowledge. I've worked with folks in the pyrotechnician field that have been shooting fireworks for 30, 40 years. But to be quite frank, they're pretty ignorant about some of the safety rules, and I would never knowingly shoot with them on a scene. Just because they've been doing it for all the years doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing it right or they know how to do it. And so really that's where certification comes in, because it's experience and knowledge. You have to have both to get a certificate. And, so just because somebody looks spiffy in a uniform or, appears to have everything on the outside, does that mean that they have everything on the inside to be successful? And so again, how do you qualify the capabilities of the new hire? Are they going to understand things like projection, transformation of data, coordinate systems versus, geographic versus projected? Those types of questions. A lot of times that's how I determine if somebody has geospatial skills when we're working on projects. I can ask them one of these questions about, hey, what datum is this in? And if they don't know, that tells me that, yeah, maybe they're a good software user, but they're not necessarily up to date on how good or bad their database is and what the projection is and whatnot. And so, the biggest thing again is that GISPs have that knowledge base and should at least have a fundamental understanding of those things. If you're a supervisor and have folks working for you, why should you support those staff in getting a GISP? Well, I would argue a couple good reasons. One is you're investing in your staff. This is not about who's best at the software, right? It's about who's a well-rounded individual when it comes to the geospatial professional. And so if you don't invest in your staff, they're going to fall behind very, very quickly. And if you don't invest in the staff and they want that, they're going to leave. They're going to find a better job. So it's really important. Certification is very important for staff, your staff, because it is a pathway to helping them become more knowledgeable and get better, better skills and educate themselves to be more rounded in the geospatial profession. It's also encouragement for those folks to get back to the profession. It's not just about education, it's being present in the profession, right? It's about getting those folks out, getting them in the conferences, presenting, networking, and helping build our community and making it better. So really, as a supervisor, you need to think of the GISP as an investment for your staff and not simply an expense. Why should you certify as a geospatial professional? Well, again, as an employee, a potential employee gives you competitive advantage. It increases your earning potential. It establishes and grows foundational knowledge. Again, we've got a blueprint for you to educate yourself towards. You may not have all those areas. It kind of gives you that pathway, and it helps establish professional credibility. Within our industry, we don't have a wide, broad acceptance of the GISP at this point. We don't even have, there's still a lot of folks that don't know what it is. And that's kind of unique because if you look at unrelated fields like engineering and surveying, pretty much everybody knows that if you're going to make it, you're going to go through those steps to get that, like apprenticeships and then that professional licensure, that professional certification. And so it's becoming an expectation, but again, it's part of that maturation. Again, you as a GISP, you have to give back to the profession, you have to help it grow, and you have to be present in our profession. Again, you're making an investment, not spending money when you become a GISP. So some closing thoughts, again, is becoming a GISP is a long-term investment. It's an initial investment, but it's that long-term investment because you're committing yourself to continuing education and being present within our community. Maintaining it is part of that investment. And then if you look around, and URIS is a very good example of it, GISPs are very active in the profession and their field. And so many of the folks that are leading a lot of the efforts, the folks that are involved in these professional associations, they're either GISPs or in their process of getting their GISPs. And we've had a lot of folks come through the program, the folks that helped set it up, and they're moving on and retiring, but they're staying active in the field, and they're staying active through what we call our retired GISP program. And so I want to kind of sum it up and take some questions. And I said this before, but I always like ending on this. Bill Johnson, who some of you may know, used to work for State of New York. Now he works for AppGeo. When we did a survey with NISDIC a couple years back, Bill responded back, and his initial reaction to the GISP program was he just kind of brushed it off. He didn't see any value in it. But then when he took the time to educate himself, he learned that there was value. And so Bill came back, and I used this quote before, but I'll say it again. He said that the GISP program is something that reinforces behaviors that enrich the profession. And so what I'd like to do by closing out is saying, if this is not something you know about, take some time to get to know the program. It's obviously not for everyone, but before you make a decision, make sure you know and understand what the GISP is, and then decide if you want to move forward. And so with that, I would be glad to take questions. There's my question slide, but I'm actually going to go one more. Yeah, and I'll end on that. And so,
Thanks,
thank
Tony.
you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thanks, Tony. Really great presentation. We really appreciate it. Guys, everybody attending here, if you have questions, please feel free to jot them down in the chat box there, and we'll get your question right off to Tony. In the meantime, we have one question from Allison, and she asks, when it is time to recertify, how soon can you do so within that year?
So basically for recertification, it's everything that happens in the 3-year period. So what I tell folks, if you're old like me, and even if you're not, if you have hard time remembering things because you're always so busy, once you submit your portfolio, you can immediately start filling up your recertification portfolio. And so you can literally start the day after you hit enter for the previous one. And we encourage folks to do that just so you get stuff in there. Like today, you're in the seminar, you can put that in and you'll get some credit for being here. That way you don't have to try to track everything. You theoretically can recertify immediately, but we encourage folks to do it, within a couple months of your recertification date. And the important thing to remember is no matter when you recertify, everything appends. And so if you recertify early, the recertification doesn't start until your expiration date. So you're not losing out. There's no penalty by recertifying early, nor is there any benefit by recertifying late. We get a lot of people, we're very generous with our deadlines. And we get a lot of folks that will recertify late, and they're like, hey, no, I recertified in 2021. And it's like, no, you recertified a year late, you're actually up for recertification. So my recommendation is start immediately putting the information in and then hit enter when you're at it or about that 3-year mark.
Okay, great. So we have another question from Amy, and she asks, what is the recommended practice for timing regarding GISP test prep and testing?
We recommend, a lot of it just depends on how well prepared you are for the exam. My experience, and I don't have any evidence, but it seems like, folks that come out of a geography program, and especially folks that come out with a master's degree, so they've had a number of years of education, generally speaking, are well suited to take the exam with a minimal amount of additional education. Whereas some folks that maybe started out as a biologist may not have all that fundamental knowledge. So that's why we really recommend that folks take that practice exam, because you can take it the first time and it's a really good barometer because it exposes you to questions. Again, these are questions that we just retired out, and it kind of gives you a sense of it allows you to self-assess. And so you take that exam, and that's, like initial screening. If you do fairly well, or you felt pretty confident, then you can direct your studying towards that and then take it a second time. Unfortunately, there's not a perfect example. It really just depends on how much background information you have first. We've had a couple folks that lapsed on their GISP and decided to retest, and took it fairly cold and passed, like with a very high score, simply because they've been in the industry so long that they've got the experience, they have the education, and all that stuff was in their head. So try that self-assessment, whether you take the official exam or the unofficial exam, the free one. That's that good barometer to kind of tell you where you are. Most folks typically spend a couple months studying for the exam, about usually 2 to 3 months.
Okay, great. Once again, if you have any questions, here we go. We got a question here from Matthew. So he says, I have 20 plus years experience, 8 years as a full-time GIS professional, bachelor's degree in anthropology, GIS certificate from MSU. I took a lot of Esri training courses between roughly 2010 and 2015, but don't necessarily have certificates from them. Do you know of any way to get these from Esri somewhere under work accounts so we would not have access to them anymore? So, okay, yeah, well.
All right, so 2 things. One, in an initial portfolio, anything 2 points or less does not require documentation. In the recertification portfolio, there's no requirements for documentation except the ethics statement. So in this case, I'm pretty sure you're going to be initial GISP. What I would tell you is, so whenever you're doing your portfolio, start out with big ticket items, right? So Matt's got 8+ years in experience. So I would start with that, put that in. The only documentation you need is a letter from your most recent supervisor, because part of the portfolio is what are called supplemental points. You have minimums in education, experience, and contributions, but you need to get 150. So you have to have 52 what are called, they're basically could come from any category. So if you have a lot of experience, you're going to get a lot of those supplemental points right out of the gate. For we take any and all degrees. So Matt would get 20 points for his bachelor's degree in anthropology, and then he would get additional points for the classes he took that were related to geospatial. Assuming it's a traditional semester-based class, that's 3 points a class. So Matt would probably get his minimum in education points without even needing to worry about the Esri courses. However, if you do need those courses, the Esri ones, again, 2 points or less, no certificate. And so you would basically just enter those in as however many hours or however many days those courses were. Way back when, Esri courses used to be 3 to 5 days. So it's changed a lot. And so again, you don't need documentation for those. You could just list them separately.
Great, thanks, Tony. So we have a couple more questions here, and we'll kind of try to get to them a little rapidly since we have 5 minutes left. Courtney has some suggestions for test prep that I will leave for the group to read. But Patrick asks, do you foresee a time when the exam will be required for recertification?
No plans to do that at this time.
Okay, great. Anthony asks, how do Esri MOOC courses count towards recertification?
So for a MOOC course, what you do is you estimate the number of hours you spent in the actual MOOC itself, and then how much time you spent independent of it. Because I understand most of those MOOCs require you to do additional things, but it's the amount of time that you spent doing the work, not the start date and end date. And they would count as educational credits. So again, it's just the determination of how many hours you invested in it.
Okay, all right, great. We got a couple minutes left here. Again, if there's any last minute questions, please feel free to put them in. I see Matthew has a comment there about his points. I will, leave that there. He said he got 5 points from the MSU certificate. But yeah, any further questions? I actually have just a quick question. And it's not really related to certification, but given your lengthy tenure in the GIS or in the geospatial world, what's your take on the quality or the qualities of students that you see coming into the workforce from, let's say, 20 years ago to now? Do you see a change in capabilities, any positives or negatives?
Well, I think what I'm seeing is not so much, how good or bad they are, but we're because the field has expanded so much and there's so many different things. Back when I started, it was GIS, raster GIS, vector GIS, cartography, manual cartography, digital cartography, and some methods classes. There's so much more that's out there now just because the field's grown so much that one of the things that we're seeing is very few universities now offer cartography classes. And so you're starting to see a movement away from some of the more conceptual things to focus on some of the more practical things. And the practical things are important, but at the end of the day, again, we're seeing a lot of folks that don't have cartography skills. They don't understand conceptual foundations like datums and projections. And the other big thing is back when I got started, we had to create everything ourselves data-wise. Now everything's provided. And if you don't have somebody teaching you how to know what's good data versus bad data, a lot of folks just get a database and off we go. But if you've ever worked with imagery, if you have an imagery database that was not properly georeferenced, go to Google Earth and look at the bridges. They don't georeference the bridges, so they look like they're, let's look like St. Louis Arch. And that could be very problematic if you're working with data that, relies on a road network. And so I think that's the biggest thing is the movement away from some of the more traditional education to focus on the contemporary. And we really see that with a GIS certificate. Like Penn State only requires you to take two GIS classes, and then the rest are electives. So you can get a certificate and never take a cartography course, which I think is kind of wrong, but that's me.
Yeah, that's good. Valid points.
But that being said, the kids that are coming out of these programs are super, super smart and doing some really, really cool stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and you see a lot more focus on coding and things like that now, right? Versus, like you said, some of the more traditional stuff, right? So
you got to have both.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, Tony, I think it's 12:59. I think it's safe to say that we can close the meeting out. We certainly appreciate your time, and this was a wonderful presentation. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing a lot of you at GIS Pro in Columbus.
Super.
All right, take care, everyone.